I read a book from an amazing engineer in Australia. So what this gentleman said is, when you set up your speakers, start with an empty room. Take like a smallish speaker. It doesn't need to be like a full-way kind of three-way monitoring system. And like get a friend of yours to go into the room and sit where you think you could sit in the room, sort of like there's a rule that you should sit maybe at a third of one of the walls and 2/3 distance from the other walls, but just experiment, just walk around and have your friend go around you at a fixed distance with the speaker against the wall where you intend to place your speakers, and also forward, backward. You will be shocked. Like every time I've demonstrated this in live workshops, people just like, you could see their face just go, no way. So there's a thing that your speaker agitates the room, and depending on where it's positioned in the room, you'll have more frequencies and more waves that are in phase or out of phase. So just moving it literally 5 centimeters, I did this 2 weeks ago with a friend, and he was just like, yeah, blown away. Can make the difference between your sound feeling, like you'll get to a point where you'll feel like your sound, your speakers are connecting with the room and the waves are just pouring over you really clean. And then you move it over 10 centimeters and it's just broken. It sounds hollow, and you could spend a fortune on acoustics and it would not really get better. The next step now, which is gain staging. For me, actually, one of the biggest jumps I did in my music and production process was when I read somewhere, I think it was Gearspace. I read that people recommended to keep your channel level, so the signal that's actually present in your channel, at around minus 18 dB full scales. Let's have a look, for example, just at this kick drum. So you see, we're very close to minus 18. And the reason for that is that actually a lot of analog gear from the good old days was built and all calibrated so that 0 VU is minus 18 dB. And a lot of the plugins we use, especially the ones that do some kind of analog modeling, have somehow that behavior in them. So if you send like a nice, I don't know, Universal Audio LA2A, or maybe the master bus compressor from Ableton, like a signal that's peaking at minus 3 dB full scale, and then you just try to lower it somehow in the compressor, in essence, you're totally overloading whatever modeling was going on in it. It's one of the biggest things you can do for your sound, is to not have them super loud in the channels, and instead boost the level when you get to the pre-master and to the mastering stage. The golden time frame, they call it, which is how long do you have to make a real decision that's kind of informed about what you're mixing. Our ears get used to stuff really, really quickly. And something that is totally piercing or totally overwhelming in the low end can start to feel like normal and can start to feel like it's okay. Which is why it's so good to take breaks, and why it's so good to commit yourself to what you think sounds good right in the beginning as quick as possible. Like once you have a kick drum sound where you go, man, this sounds really amazing and the bass sounds really great against it, it's always good to just take that, because sometimes you keep going on the mix, and then it actually ends up getting a lot worse. Like often the decisions we make, when you hear a kick drum for the first time, you immediately know, compared to the reference kick drums that hopefully you're listening to, you immediately know it has too much mids, a little bit too much highs, it's not loud enough, and it's not cutting through enough. So you immediately know what's to do. Sometimes, like literally, I would write it down and just do it without even listening, and then play again and see if now it actually hits the mark. Because if you have it in a loop for like 10 minutes, I guarantee you by the 10th minute, you're not really going to surely know what you were actually aiming for. I have my reference track set up in such a way that I'm just hearing kick and bass. As you can see, the way that the plots are falling are very similar, and that's actually a very good sign. And now let me bring in my bass against that, the telemark. So as you can see now, I mean, they sound, different, of course, there's different tracks, but the frequency, energy, and spectrum, and the way it's falling, and the dynamics are really close. Okay, I thought that sounds kind of cool, but I thought let me mess around with the velocity, because I was thinking about how do I get this to sound better, more interesting. Like, because right now it's just a synth fully open, right? Cool stuff can be done with it, but I wanted to experiment. So I didn't just take the very first recording that I did. I kept digging. I kept looking for different things, looking for something that will really work. So I tweaked the velocity of the synth. So this is what it sounded like after I reduced the velocity of the bass. Let me go back to the other one. So already, I think personally, a bit more interesting, like a bit more groovy, kind of cool. I then went one step further and just experimented also with the gate, so the note length of the sequence. Like that's already, I think, starting to sound like it's kind of, you know, it's, for my feeling, it's grooving, it's going in a good direction. Let me bring in some drums against that to see if that'll work. Let me go back to the original sound. So what I'm trying to show is like how important it is to keep refining the little raw pieces that you're going to use in your track until you get to a point where you're like, this is starting to feel tasty. Because like you could take that first sound and sound engineer it for 2 hours, but it's probably not going to come to a place where it's groovy and people start moving to it on the dance floor, even if it maybe sounds very well mixed. And the final step that I then tried was to add some swing to it. So coming from this, to that. So that's the original sample.
But you're all I think about.
And now let's listen to the vocals, which is all just the same sample. I've just worked with it a bit.
Let me speak my truth.
Those are called basotect. It's like an acoustic foam. It's fire retardant. So if you're going to put up acoustics, I really recommend something that can't catch fire if a candle goes close to it. They're not super expensive and they absorb quite a lot of frequencies quite low down if they're thick. And I always attach them sort of 5 centimeters from the wall by putting a piece of styrofoam below them, and then in that case you can put lights around them and stuff, which is practical. So basotect I can totally recommend. I'm sure you know that these egg cartons and stuff doesn't work. Don't go anywhere near that. And this thin gray foam, it's no good. Like, don't do it. Don't put it up. Besides your significant other hating you, it doesn't really help you, because all it takes away is just the very high frequencies, makes your room sound very dull, and it'll skew the way you perceive the music. Now I can move the whole clip, you see? Like the whole clip is just shifting through there, and it's super useful as a tool for getting your grooves right. Like right on the money, it works kind of, but it's boring, I think. That would be very shuffled. Let me bring back my kick for reference. So I could use what we just tracked in two ways. I could use it as a layer below the original sound and just mix them together and make them into some kind of like a soundscape. I could use it for a breakdown, but just also in itself, in its own right, I think it's an interesting, nice build-up. That's got a nice little spot for itself now. Let's see where the kick plays in that. You see, the kick is way below it. And right in the middle of that space is where we ideally want to drop our bass. Then like, you have the easiest way to do a mix. It is above it. I made my life easy. Okay, so this is the easiest way you can get a clean mix. You see? That's where the bass, God, what's it called? Someone please help me. What's the fundamental? Oh God, I remember it now. It's the fundamental is what it's called. The frequency that, you know, the bass is playing. So you see the fundamental of the bass is, what is it? 60 Hertz. And the fundamental of the kick drum is quite a bit below it. It's around 40. And the fundamental of the toms is quite a bit above it. It can take so long to move these little Tetris blocks around. So what I tend to do these days is I'll just set myself up to find a sound, a vibe that I like. So then I know kind of what the beginning of my track should be. And I'll go over here to the good old sequencing view, and I'll just start. As you see, we're just tracking the intro now. I'm kind of counting in my head. I know that around 9, something should happen. So now I have like a rough idea of something that could be the beginning of a track. It's all based off of automation, so you can see the parts are running from beginning to end. But honestly, I didn't really feel that one. Like, it wasn't really cool. It wasn't great. So, okay, select all, delete, and let's just try it again. And this is what I would recommend to you, is try to keep going with this until you find something that really clicks with you, where you're really like, yeah, that was a really cool take. And actually, let me try to do this without being so rational, logical, which is definitely my challenge. I'm just showing you this as an idea that you can do this in real time and just do different takes and kind of tracks of what your sequence could develop like. And the more you do this, the better it gets. You can get to a point where you come to a sequence idea that is very organic, very weird, very different, maybe also very inspired ideally. And it's not this Tetris effect of dropping little blocks around the screen that is by definition going to become something very square and kind of rigid by the way that you're doing it. So I can really recommend with doing 3, 4, 5 takes like this of what your sequence could be. Maybe you comp them into different sequences, so maybe you start a second sequence here and then just grab the pieces of those sequences that actually really work and make your track out of that, then move the blocks around, and of course then you can go deep in and start to really optimize things. And I have many friends and I have phases myself where I listen to my music, or I listen to old tracks, or I listen to projects in progress and be like, man, it's just not good enough. It's not worth it. Why am I doing this? Well, you guys know this, right? This story of being overly self-critical and just tearing yourself down. And very often it's just my mind having a bad day, being bored, depressed, whatever, and just starting to chop into stuff that actually maybe a few days ago I was really into. So I think it's very essential to realize that 99% of people who will listen to your music will not notice that the snare has a little peak around 1 kilohertz. That's a little bit annoying. It's important as a musician that you stand behind your productions and that you fix things like that when you hear them. But we take it way more seriously and we look way more into the details that people that listen to the music. What they're going to listen to for is, does this move me? Does this do something with or for me? And can I connect to it on some level? Like, is it something that somehow means something to me? And there are some of the most beautiful songs that are recorded so shabbily or are so under instrumentated and so simple. But if it moves people, that's way more important than the millions of details you can get lost in and then start to criticize yourself for not knowing how to make a good groove with hi-hats and toms or whatever it is that you're not doing to what you wish you would be. It's definitely a learning process, which is why I say this here, of never stopping to explore, trying new things. And I think with every track, you get better. With every track, you learn new things, which is why I really recommend to release and produce as much music as you can quickly, because you'll learn way, way quicker and get to that space where you're 100% happy with what you're doing much, much quicker.
So there's like a new world, but it's very good to have the big picture, start to figure out what it's all about, and then you can like start focusing on the things that you need.